This is the Mop Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. My sister went to see Senator Cory Booker in New Jersey on Saturday. The Washington Post reports 1,300 anti-Trump rallies across America, all put together by more than 150 organizers challenging this administration's firing of federal workers and Trump's rounding up of immigrants with no due process. Tourist visits to the White House canceled as more than 100,000 protesters showed up in Washington, D.C. on Saturday. Trump is spending the weekend, as he always does, in Mar-a-Lago playing golf. The Atlantic, reporting the Miami Herald, says the number of Canadians flying to South Florida, where Trump lives, down 20% this year. Fewer and fewer people want to visit Florida. The Associated Press reports 11% of American jobs come from tourism, which is responsible for $2.4 trillion of our economy. But Condé Nast Travel reports there is almost a 13% dip in Europeans, Middle Easterners, and people from Africa visiting the United States since Trump was sworn back in. Condé Nast Traveler reporting Americans traveling within the United States, Americans traveling in their own country, down 27% since Trump came back to the White House. Americans too frightened to visit other parts of America. What's going on? The director of the American Friends Service Committee's U.S.-Mexico border program, that's a nonprofit, it aids migrants, and the director is Pedro Rios. He told the Associated Press yesterday that tourists from Canada and Europe visiting this country legally with no criminal records are being detained by immigration officials at record numbers. That's why fewer and fewer people are coming to America. Detention is big business. For-profit private detention companies like CoreCivic and Geo Group, big donors to Donald Trump because they make billions holding immigrants. And now they're holding tourists. The longer they hold them, the more they make. Jasmine Mooney, she's a Canadian actress. She wrote in The Guardian that CoreCivic earned $500 million a year just from ICE contracts when Biden was president. Imagine what they're going to be making now that Trump is back in office. Jasmine Mooney wrote this piece describing the 12 days she spent in a series of ICE detention facilities throughout the Southwest United States after she tried to renew her 3-year-old work visa. No crime, no violation, no criminal record, handcuffed, shackled, open toilets, occasionally solitary confinement. It took days before she could call a lawyer. The entire time she was being told, "Don't worry, everything's fine. You're not being charged with a crime. We'll get you out of here as soon as possible." Nearly 2 weeks, Jasmine Mooney locked in a cage. As she says in her piece for The Guardian, why was she locked in that cage or several cages for 2 weeks? Because there's money in keeping her detained, accidentally keeping her detained for as long as possible. There never was any financial incentive, she says, in anyone hurrying up and getting to the bottom of why exactly she's being locked up. She committed no crime, no issue with her visa. The Financial Times reporting about Germans suffering from PTSD, waking up screaming from nightmares that they are still stuck inside American detention facilities, handcuffed with their legs in shackles for weeks. For example, 25-year-old Lucas Seeloff, German tourist engaged to an American citizen. This year, he ended up spending 16 days in an ICE detention facility, shackled, handcuffed, for no reason. No criminal record. He had visited America several times before. His visa papers were in perfect order. Doesn't matter. Donald Trump told ICE, "I want those cages filled to capacity. Put numbers on the board. Lock someone up." The Associated Press reporting of another German tourist held for 45 days in an ICE detention facility. Asked to comment, a spokesperson for ICE told the Associated Press, "We don't discuss particulars." They were only willing to say that tourists are subject to detention if there's any reason to believe the terms of their visa might have been violated, or if CoreCivic and Geo Group need to juice their bottom lines. The Associated Press and the Financial Times writing about Becky Burke visiting from Wales, held for 19 days in detention cages. Her father telling the BBC as she was put on a plane back to Great Britain, handcuffed in leg and waist chains. Her father said to the BBC, "Good grief, she's not Hannibal Lecter," unquote. Paul Ingram writing in the Tucson Sentinel that a female Chinese immigrant being held by Border Patrol in Yuma, Arizona, hung herself in her cell last Saturday, dead. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, ranking member on the Immigration Integrity, Security, and Enforcement Subcommittee, accusing Border Patrol agents of neglect, especially after new surveillance video clearly shows this woman, the detainee, video of her making a noose and then hanging herself with it. Paul Ingram writing in the Tucson Sentinel that it took 2 hours for medical teams to arrive after the body was discovered. Custom and Border Protection apparently tried to keep this suicide secret. They didn't want to go public with it. They are obligated by law to publicly detail any deaths of all inmates. They only went public after the Tucson Sentinel began investigating this suicide 5 days later. This woman was arrested on March 26 in Needles, California, after a routine vehicle stop revealed she and her traveling companion were carrying $220,000 in cash, and her B-1, B-2 visitor visa had expired. I can hear J.D. Vance. I can hear Caroline Leavitt, the White House spokesman. That seems awfully suspicious to me. Why was she carrying $220,000 in cash and not handing it over to Donald Trump? They want to, I know, they're thinking she probably did something bad, right? Why was she carrying $220,000? I guess we'll never find out, will we? Because she committed suicide. No doctors and no emergency response for 2 hours, and it's all on video. Congressman Jayapal said, quote, "When Customs and Border Protection agents take a person into custody, they are responsible for their well-being, full stop." She went on to say this detainee died by suicide, and initial reports have indicated that certain immigration procedures to ensure the safety and welfare of individuals in custody were not conducted. She went on to say there is no excuse for why immigration and border agents cannot verify if some of the necessary welfare checks occurred, or why some of the documented welfare checks were incorrectly reported. She then added, reports have consistently shown that the United States falls far short of its obligations to treat all detained people with dignity and fairness. But don't worry, these tourists, these These immigrants, no, they're just tourists. They're just immigrants. Can't happen to me. I'm an American citizen. 2.5 million of us behind bars, most of us without a trial. The UN rapporteur called our prisons a human rights disaster. But it can't happen to us. Can't happen to us in America. They're just tourists. They're just migrants. The Washington Post reporting ICE not only detaining United States citizens, but deporting them as well. Since Trump came back into office, there have been 7 U.S. citizens that we know of, 7 U.S. citizens picked up by ICE. That doesn't include the thousands and thousands of Hispanic American citizens being ordered to show proof of their citizenship. The Washington Post reporting the Trump administration doesn't maintain a public database of U.S. citizens accidentally detained or deported by ICE. That's odd. They scream transparency. This administration, everything's out in the open. The Post cites one study showing that since 2011, as many as 1.5% of all so-called immigrants deported by ICE are not, in fact, immigrants. They are, in fact, U.S. citizens, not people with their papers in order, not people with visas. Citizens, 1.5%. On March 15th, Donald Trump issued an executive order invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, declaring that America is at war because we are being invaded by Venezuelan and El Salvadoran gang members. He said the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 gave him wartime powers to authorize ICE to begin rounding up criminal gang members and then ship them to El Salvador, which was kind enough to house these migrants in their prisons, in their supermax prisons, for the low, low price of $6 million a year. That's what we're paying El Salvador to take the migrants. It doesn't matter that El Salvador's prison system is a human rights nightmare, even worse, far, far worse than ours. 70 inmates to a cell, open toilets, lights never turned off, solitary confinement in pure darkness, 1 meal a day, a shortage of beds, people sleeping on floors, tortured, little to no medical supervision, rats, bed bugs, filth, squalor, like the kitchen at Mar-a-Lago. The president of El Salvador is taking our migrants and has even offered to lock up American citizens, insisting I can do it cheaper. I'm sure you can. And Trump says, I like that idea. Trump even suggesting 3 American citizens be sent down there right after our Attorney General, Pam Bondi, charged them with domestic terrorism for vandalizing Tesla dealerships. Kristi Noem, our head of Homeland Security, visited the prison in El Salvador last week for a photo shoot where she violated international law, standing in front of these prisoners, not American prisoners. These are not American prisoners. Those are not the migrants, but she used it as a photo op to record a message telling whomever that if you come to America without documents, you're committing a crime against Americans, and this is where you'll end up. What Kristi Noem said, and where she said it, and why she said it, are crimes. They are she committed international crimes. Well, sneaking into America is a civil offense. It's not a crime. You don't get locked up for being here without the right papers. You don't get locked up for being in America with no documents. It's not a crime to sneak into this country because our economy runs on undocumented Americans. It's only a civil offense. It is not criminal. Google it. It is not a crime to be in this country without papers. Republicans play with language. They lie, is what they do. They call migrants criminals. That's a lie. They say it's a crime sneaking into America. That's a lie, not a crime, civil offense. The migrants are not criminals. That is why the Trump administration, Kristi Noem, J.D. Vance, Caroline Leavitt, and the lawyers for the Justice Department have to lie, especially for these deportations to hold up in court. They lie and say the people who were shipped to El Salvador have criminal records. That's a lie. They lie that these migrants we shipped to El Salvador are members of criminal gangs. That's a lie. They offer zero proof, not to the American people, not to the judges. Right after Trump issued his executive order invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, 3 planes filled with immigrants from El Salvador and Venezuela flew to El Salvador, where 238 Venezuelan migrants and 23 Salvadoran migrants were hustled off to that supermax, that torture chamber in El Salvador. ICE, Trump, Kristi Noem, J.D. Vance, Caroline Leavitt, Marco Rubio, they keep lying, insisting all the passengers on those 3 flights were criminals and that all of them are members of either MS-13, that would be the El Salvadoran gang, or Tren de Aragua, a transnational gang that began in Venezuela. They are not. There is zero evidence, no proof that any of them were gang members, other than being Hispanic and having tattoos. No criminal records, zero, none of them. All they had were tattoos and melanin. That's their proof. One of the men on the 3rd flight to El Salvador that day was Kilmer Abrego Garcia, who came to America from El Salvador when he was 16 back in 2011 to escape MS-13. And that is why so many migrants from Central America end up trying to get to this country to escape the gangs. They're seeking asylum from the gangs. He ended up getting asylum from the gangs. Kilmer Abrego Garcia was living quietly for 8 years in Maryland when he was stopped by police while standing outside a Home Depot looking for work. And someone accused him of being a member of El Salvador's MS-13 gang. So, based on hearsay, Garcia was taken by ICE and detained. Eventually, he went before a judge, an immigration judge, who ruled zero evidence that Garcia is a gang member. Not only that, this judge, back in 2019, ruled that under no circumstances could Garcia be deported to El Salvador because it wouldn't be safe for him. Garcia has what is called protected legal status. He's not a citizen, but he's documented, and it's not safe for him to return to his country of origin, El Salvador. The judge said, "You belong here with us." That was in 2019 when he was given what is called protected legal status. He is now married to a United States citizen, has 3 children. One of them is special needs. He obeyed the law every step of the way, never broke it, checked in with immigration officials when he was supposed to on a timely schedule. In our system, in our country legally, he had a Social Security number. And when he worked, he paid into Social Security and Medicare like they all do, like all the undocumented migrants who are, in fact, documented. Most of them have Social Security numbers, and they pay into Social Security and Medicare, even though they're not entitled to any of it because they're not citizens. We make money off undocumented migrants. The Congressional Budget Office, I told you about this. The fewer migrants we allow in, the less money going into Social Security and Medicare. That's from the Congressional Budget Office. Well, in March, police pulled Garcia over in an IKEA parking lot for no reason other than melanin. And he's in an IKEA parking lot, and the police are doing to him what they're doing to a lot of Hispanics. And they looked him up, and he was in the system. They informed him his protected legal status given to him in 2019 had been revoked, and he was arrested. Days later, Garcia is loaded onto that 3rd flight to El Salvador's prison. One little problem. His protected legal status had not been revoked. It was, according to ICE, quote, an administrative error, unquote. ICE said it was an oversight. And now his wife, his kids, his neighbors want him home. He doesn't belong in that El Salvadoran torture chamber, especially since a judge in 2019 specifically said under no circumstances can he be sent to El Salvador. It's not safe for him. Garcia's case is now before a federal judge where lawyers for the Trump administration are making a mockery of our courts, our Constitution, our immigration system, religion, Jesus, and basic human decency. There is, under no circumstances, can any of the lawyers, anybody at DHS, anybody in the Trump administration, claim they have any respect for our Constitution, our courts, our immigration system, God, Jesus, or basic human decency. Follow this case. Follow this case. So before I continue, let me explain why Garcia is so important. There are 3 major constitutional issues surrounding Garcia with 3 separate judges. And so I'll get back to Kilmer Abrego Garcia, the El Salvadoran with protected legal status, unlawfully detained in that El Salvadoran prison in a second, okay? That's him. That is him. His wife, his children, his parents identified him. This case is very important. Our government is saying, yeah, we know a judge gave him protected legal status. We know he's not a gang member. We know he's a criminal. We know we made a mistake, but there's nothing we can do about it. I'm just going to tell you what's going on, okay? On April 4th, 2025, that would be Friday, Federal District Judge Paula, I'm going to say Zinnis. I know I'm butchering her name. I should have looked it up, but it's Xinis. So I'm going to call her Judge Paula. I don't know how to pronounce Xinis. She ordered Garcia to be flown back to the United States immediately. I'll come back to him, Garcia, in a moment. And I'll tell you what lawyers for the Trump administration told Judge Paula. It's so outrageous, it's going to make your head explode. And if I tell you now, I can't do the rest of the show. You won't be able to concentrate on anything else I want to talk about. So put a pin in Garcia, the young man who is sitting in a prison in El Salvador due to an oversight. I'll come back to him, okay? So he's one leg of this three-legged stool. There are two other constitutional issues that need resolving. So, to refresh your memory, on March 15th, Donald Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which he claims gives him the authority to deport Venezuelan and El Salvadoran gang members because, he said, they have invaded our country, therefore we, America, we're in a state of war, which means Trump now has wartime powers to round up, detain, and deport anyone he so desires with zero due process. War is declared by Congress. The War Powers Act gives a president some, I think, 90 days to send troops overseas, and then he needs a war authorization. He's not invoking the War Powers Act. He hasn't asked Congress to declare war on the Venezuelan and El Salvadoran gangs. He's declared that this is an enemy invasion and we are a nation at war, without consulting anybody other than his fevered, syphilitic brain. The last time, allegedly syphilitic, the last president who invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 was Franklin Roosevelt in order to round up Japanese American citizens, U.S. citizens, and he placed them in concentration camps. One of the worst things, and then the Supreme Court held it up, the Karamutsu decision, which I'm mispronouncing. It's that and Dred Scott, horrible. At least we were in a state of war. Congress declared war. So Roosevelt's executive order, as evil as it was, at least it was grounded in a shred of reality, not defending it. We are not at war. Venezuela and El Salvador are not invading us. These gangs, which Trump has officially labeled as terrorists, they are not waging war on America. So there is the issue of his executive order invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Right after midnight of March 15th, okay, he invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 on March 15th in the afternoon. Right after midnight of March 14th, early morning, March 15th, it was a Saturday, hours before the executive order was signed, they had telegraphed that they were going to announce this. So the ACLU and Democracy Forward, knowing that this executive order was about to be declared, they petitioned U.S. District Court Judge James E. Boasberg on behalf of 5 Venezuelan immigrants, asking him to issue a temporary restraining order blocking these 5 Venezuelan immigrants from being subject to deportation based on Trump's upcoming invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. They knew later in the day Trump was going to sign this executive order. They got a jump on it and got a temporary restraining order to block his invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. That was, they filed the petition early Saturday morning, March 15th. At 9:40 a.m., this is the top secret timeline that we're not supposed to know about. Everything happened on March 15th. At 9:40 a.m. on March 15th, before Trump even signed the executive order, Judge Boasberg issued a temporary restraining order blocking the deportation of these 5 Venezuelan migrants being represented by the ACLU and Democracy Forward. And when they filed the petition with Judge Boasberg, the ACLU, Democracy Forward, had no idea what Trump was planning to do with his executive order. They knew they knew if you were a Venezuelan migrant in detention, you were in trouble. So the ACLU and Democracy Forward petitioned the court early on March 15th on behalf of these 5 Venezuelan migrants, knowing that if the judge issues a temporary restraining order for those 5 Venezuelan migrants, it's a blanket restraining order for every migrant, for every Venezuelan in detention, that you cannot deport them using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Okay? 9:40 a.m., March 15th, Judge Boasberg issues a temporary restraining order. He says, hold off on any deportations of migrants that have been authorized under Donald Trump's invocation, upcoming, he hadn't invoked it yet, upcoming invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Judge Boasberg knew that Trump was going to invoke it later that day. And he said he can go ahead and invoke it, but it's unlikely to hold up under scrutiny because we're not at war. So that order comes down at 9:40 a.m. on March 15th. 6 hours later, the orange Donald Trump officially signs the executive order. So Judge Boasberg, the ACLU, Democracy Forward, they were brilliant. They got the restraining order before this executive order had even been signed. Okay? But Trump signed the executive order, even though Boasberg issues the temporary restraining order. In response to the order, 1 hour later, on March 15th, Judge Boasberg convenes an emergency hearing on a Saturday, demanding that Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign, representing the Trump administration, explain, are any deportations imminent? What's going on? And when told by Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign, yes, there are planes that are about to take off, Boasberg verbally told Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign, tell the Trump administration, tell the Department of Human Services, tell ICE right now to turn those planes around. Do not let them take off. He made that instruction at 6:45 p.m. on March 15th. So this all happened in one day. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign was told there can be no flights to El Salvador. He was verbally instructed by Judge Boasberg to tell ICE, to tell Kristi Noem, to tell Donald Trump that if the planes took off, turn them around immediately. That was an oral order, which is as good as a written one. And at 7:36 p.m. the same day, Judge Boasberg issued in writing a 14-day temporary restraining order, reiterating what he verbally instructed Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign. No deportations taking place under Trump's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 for 2 weeks until we can sort out its constitutionality. But by that time, the planes were in the air, at least 2 of them. And even though Judge Boasberg ordered them to be turned around, they were not turned around. The Trump administration later arguing, well, we can't turn the planes around once they're over international territory. Anyone making that claim should be stripped of their law license. So there were 3 flights, none of them in El Salvador, when Judge Boasberg's ruling was handed down. 45 minutes after the judge's ruling, that written ruling, 1 plane touched down in El Salvador. By law, that plane was supposed to be refueled, sent back to the United States with all its passengers still on board. Instead, ICE handed over the migrants to the president of El Salvador, who later took to Twitter to mock Judge Boasberg by tweeting, "Whoopsie, too late," mocking the judge's order. "Whoopsie, too late. It's too late." At 9:46 p.m., more than 2 hours after Judge Boasberg ordered all the flights to return, the second plane heading to El Salvador landed in Honduras. At that point, it was to be ordered, turn around, come back to the United States. Do not finish this trip in El Salvador, finish it in the United States. Instead, it went on to El Salvador. The passengers on the second flight unloaded and shipped to the El Salvadoran prison in direct defiance of the judge's order. And the third flight, the one Kilmore Abrego Garcia was aboard, that landed in Honduras at 12:41 a.m., March 16th, 8 hours after Judge Boasberg told the Trump administration to turn the flights around. That flight, I believe, took off after Judge Boasberg issued his ruling in writing. It took off. It wasn't in the air. That third flight, I believe, was still on the ground in Texas, and it landed in Honduras at 12:41 a.m. March 16th, and then arrived in El Salvador a little under a half hour later. Judge Boasberg has been holding hearings to determine why his temporary restraining order was defied. And there's a big hearing this Tuesday where he might hold the Trump administration in contempt. Because every step of the way, Judge Boasberg has been lied to. He was told it's impossible to return the planes because they've already landed or they're in the air and you can't turn a flight around when it's over international waters. That's a lie. They first landed in Honduras, so they could have been turned around there. And they could have been turned around on the tarmac when they landed in El Salvador. The Trump lawyers are saying once it's in El Salvador, it's like getting the bank fee reversed. Can't do it. It's in the system. It's in the system. And Judge Boasberg was told by Trump lawyers, we cannot supply you with the exact timeline of these flights because of national security. So they're bumping this up and withholding the timelines because by revealing them, it would compromise national security. Over at the Atlantic magazine, someone pointed out that that's a violation of national security, but discussing war plans in a signal group, no big deal. Okay, so that's the second part of this story. The Trump administration defying a court order. And that's what we're going to find out on Tuesday. Does a president have to obey the courts? Must a president obey the law? Does the president have the right to sign an executive order declaring wartime powers even though we're not at war? That question has been bumped up to the Supreme Court. That's out of Judge Boasberg's venue now. He's getting to the bottom of whether or not his order was defied, the constitutionality of the executive order. He's ordered a temporary restraining order, which means we have to establish whether or not it's constitutional. That question now being considered supposedly, eventually, by the Supreme Court. Judge Boasberg coming under attack by MAGA Republicans calling for his impeachment. That's the nicest thing MAGA Republicans are calling for. Because of Judge Boasberg, Speaker Mike Johnson is threatening to defund U.S. district courts, if not eliminate them entirely. You got to remember, the U.S. district courts are a construct of congressional legislation going back all the way to the Judiciary Act, which I think was John Adams, right? And then Jefferson had another Judiciary Act. The courts, the federal courts, are not a construct of the Constitution. They were built by Congress and signed into law by Adams and Jefferson and then updated over the years. Article 3 of the Constitution calls for Supreme Court. That's all it calls for. Article 1 is Congress. 2 is the executive branch of the president. Article 3 is the Supreme Court, and all the Constitution talks about in Article 3 is a Supreme Court. Our district courts, our appeals courts, those have all been set up through acts of Congress. And therefore, Mike Johnson theoretically can defund, expand, or eliminate these courts through acts of Congress. He can pick and choose. If he can get Congress to pass it and the Senate to pass it, he can pick and choose which district courts to eliminate. House Republican Darrell Issa just introduced legislation that would prevent U.S. district judges from issuing national injunctions or national restraining orders. That's what Judge Boasberg just did. He issued a national restraining order, temporary restraining order. You always hear like a court injunction or a restraining order. Injunctions they're like long-term restraining orders where a judge can enjoin, right? An injunction is a judge orders a president, a federal agency, a school board, a corporation, local police to stop what they're doing. That's an injunction. Just stop. Whatever you're doing, stop. And that injunction can last until or if it's overturned eventually by the U.S. Supreme Court. There are injunctions that never make it to the Supreme Court, and they're not overturned. Restraining orders are temporary in nature. Judge Boasberg issued a temporary restraining order. Hey, the Alien Enemies Act of 70, we need 2 weeks to find out whether or not this is constitutional. Injunctions last longer and can be permanent. The United States federal court system has a total of 870 authorized judges. They have twice as I don't want to get too complicated here. They're like twice as many. They're like retired judges who occasionally step in. But for all intents and purposes, there are 870 authorized federal judges who sit on the circuit courts. Theoretically, any one of them can issue a temporary restraining order or an injunction blocking one of Donald Trump's nearly 200 executive orders, which have all been challenged in the courts, and so far, most have been temporarily restrained by the courts. The Republicans are very frustrated by this. They do not like judges, circuit court judges, issuing temporary restraining orders. So Darrell Iss's bill would localize restraining orders. It would localize injunctions so that when a circuit court judge puts a hold on an executive order, that hold would only apply to the district the judge is assigned to. It's stupid. So the federal courts, I probably have lost my entire audience, but somebody's got to go over this, so it's me. I'm probably just doing this show like Rupert Pupkin and the King of Comedy. No audience. I'm just in the basement with cardboard cutouts. I've lost my entire audience. I'm Rupert Pupkin. Okay. The federal courts, through an act of Congress, again, this is not the Constitution. This is legislation, so it's subject to change. The federal courts are divided into 13 circuit courts. All 50 states are divided, and territories are divided among 11 circuit courts. If you live in New York, you're part of a circuit court that includes, I think, New Jersey and Delaware. If you live in Massachusetts, you're part of a circuit court that includes Vermont and Maine. It's 13 circuit courts spread out among 50 states and the territories. All 50 states divided among 11 circuit courts. And then you have the Washington, D.C. Circuit Court. That's the 12th Circuit Court, I believe. No, it's not the 12th Circuit. It's not called the 12th Circuit Court. Let's just call it the Washington, D.C. Circuit Court. And that's kind of the most important circuit court. And the 13th Circuit Court, number 13th, it's not called the 13th Circuit Court, but we have 13 circuit courts. And the 13th, if you're going to count them, it's called the Federal Circuit Court, which is a national court that specializes in things like patent law. It's not the Supreme Court. It's a national federal circuit court that handles stuff like patents. Okay. Above these 13 circuit courts sits the Supreme Court. And if you're unhappy with a ruling from a circuit court, you have the right to appeal that judge's decision or a panel of judges' decision. You have a right to take it to the Supreme Court. However, it's unlikely the Supreme Court will take your case. Most rulings made in the circuit courts never are appealed. They never make it to the Supreme Court unless the Supreme Court feels there's a constitutional issue that must be resolved, or if the Supreme Court wants to overturn or uphold a ruling that they disagree or agree with in order to make it settled law. The Supreme Court they call it fishing. They'll often look for lower court rulings to overturn abortion. The Supreme Court will go on fishing expeditions looking for ways to come up with new precedents. So, last year the Supreme Court only heard a little over 60 cases. That's all, 60. During the 1980s, they heard 3 times the number of cases. This Supreme Court, among its many sins, is a bunch of sloths who can't handle the workload. And that's why we need more justices. We need more judges. We need more judges. We need more judges in the lower courts. God knows we need more immigration judges. We need more judges. America has too many lawyers and not enough judges. In 1980, this country had 9 judges on the Supreme Court. That was 1980. We had 250 million Americans, fewer than 250 million Americans living in this country in 1980. It's now 2025. We have 360 million Americans. We have 100 million more people living in this country. Still 9 judges. You need more judges. We need way more judges sitting on the Supreme Court to handle the caseload. We need more judges and, of course, younger judges. The wheels of justice move slowly only when those wheels are attached to a gurney. By the way, if anyone's still listening, by the way, I've checked out. I'm watching Sam Seder right now on the Majority Report. Some circuit courts, and this is important, I should just play to myself. Some circuit courts are more liberal than others, and some circuit courts are more conservative than others. And that leads to something called venue shopping or forum shopping. Conservatives will often challenge, or they did challenge, Joe Biden's executive orders down in the Fifth Circuit Court because it covers Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and it has the most conservative judges in the country. It is the most conservative circuit court in the country. Remember, 11 circuit courts divided among 50 states and territories. And the Fifth Circuit Court covers Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and it's the most conservative court in America. Now, they are federal judges. They're supposed to represent the country, not the 3 or 4 states they're housed in, but they are reflections of the politics of the region. And why is that? Because the Senate approves all these judges. President nominates them, but they have to be approved by the Senate. And the senators who represent the nominee's home state have what is called a blue slip. These are Senate rules. This is how we nominate circuit court judges. Okay? According to Senate rules, after the president nominates a circuit judge, the 2 senators from that judge's home state can put a hold on the nomination if they don't approve of this judge. So if you are a judge who lives in Mississippi, you're going to be appointed to the Fifth Circuit Court. You're not going to be appointed to a circuit court in New York. So, according to Senate rules, the president nominates a judge, and the two senators from that judge's hometown have what is called a blue slip. And I think it's called a blue slip because it's a blue slip of paper, and they have to fill it out. If they don't approve of the nomination, it doesn't go through. So you end up with circuit courts that reflect the politics of the region because senators will keep issuing blue slips disapproving of nominees if they're not liberal enough or conservative enough, depending on the region. The Fifth Circuit Court, like I said, is the reddest of the reddest. It covers Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. So the president nominates the judges for that circuit. The judges have to live in one of those three states. And the two senators from whichever state the judge is from, if he's from Texas, Louisiana, or Mississippi, those two senators have a blue slip to approve the nomination before it goes before the full Senate. Those are the Senate rules. So even Joe Biden, who I think nominated more judges than Trump, even Biden, when he nominates judges to sit on the Fifth Circuit Court in the Devil's Triangle of Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, he has to nominate conservatives. Otherwise, the two senators from whatever shithole state the nominee is from, they won't approve. And by the way, I have listeners in Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi, and they know that those three states should be territories with no voting rights. All of my listeners living in Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi would agree those three states should just be disenfranchised. So the Fifth Circuit, I'm getting to is anybody here? I'm getting to a bigger point. So the Fifth Circuit Court is the most conservative in America. I bring this up because ICE is venue shopping, forum shopping. When they round up a Palestinian college professor or a pro-Palestinian student activist from Georgetown, Columbia, or Tufts in the East, those pro-Palestinian activists are immediately sent to a concentration camp or an ICE detention, a for-profit ICE concentration camp in Louisiana or Texas. Why? Because those concentration camps fall under the jurisdiction of the Fifth Circuit Court, the most conservative court in America. ICE agents grabbed Rumeysa Ozturk, a Turkish doctoral student at Tufts. She has a perfectly legal visa, and they are now detaining her in a Louisiana concentration camp, all because of a pro-Palestinian article she wrote for the Tufts College newspaper. She was in Tufts is in Massachusetts. She should be held in an ICE detention center in Massachusetts. But we know what the politics are in Massachusetts, so ICE sends her to Louisiana. Under the McCarran-Walter Act, also known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, right now, has the authority to detain and deport any non-citizen he deems a threat to the president's foreign policy. Not national security, the president's foreign policy. According to the McCarran-Walter Act, the Nationality Act of 1952, the president, the Secretary of State, is authorized to deport and detain anybody who disagrees with them. This is not national security policy. If you disagree with the president's foreign policy, he can detain and or deport you. Rameza Ozturk, and this has never really been challenged. This has never made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. Rameza Ozturk, a Turkish doctoral student at Tufts, know her name. Rameza Ozturk, Ozturk. A Turkish doctoral student at Tufts was taken off the street by masked ICE agents. This was at Tufts in Massachusetts, and she was immediately shipped to a concentration camp in Louisiana. Now, a judge just issued a ruling that ships her back to, I believe, Vermont. I think she's going to be supposed to be held in a Vermont ICE detention center where she, I think, was initially processed. We'll see what happens. But ICE is venue shopping. The reason they sent her to Louisiana is, well, partly because the ICE detention center in Louisiana needs the business. There's a whole other story there. It's for another show. And the other reason is the Fifth Circuit Court will be more amenable to ICE than the First Circuit Court, which covers Massachusetts, where Ozturk was detained, or Vermont, or Maine. Mohammed Khalil is the pro-Palestinian activist from Colombia who led some of the protests last spring. He was one of the chief negotiators with the university. The State Department accusing him of being a Hamas sympathizer who promotes anti-Semitism on campus. So he too was rounded up and sent to a concentration camp in Louisiana, even though he should have been sent to the concentration camp across the Hudson River in Elizabeth, New Jersey. If you have a problem with my calling these concentration camps, you're an effing moron. You don't know the definition of a concentration camp. So don't listen to this show. You're too stupid. These are concentration camps. ICE doesn't want Mahmoud Khalil in the Elizabeth, New Jersey concentration camp, the for-profit concentration camp, because that's under the jurisdiction of the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, way more liberal than the Fifth Circuit Court, so they sent him to Louisiana, away from his wife, who's a U.S. citizen, 9 months pregnant. I don't know. Maybe she's already had the baby. His documents, solid. He has no arrest record. He's not being charged with a crime. He's being detained and possibly deported because he's protesting Israel's war in Gaza. Marco Rubio, Trump, all the Republicans are claiming these roundups are to stop anti-Semitism on campus. But Jews on campus, Jews in America, they don't approve of this. Yes, there are a handful who want this, but the vast majority of American Jews either agree completely with these pro-Palestinian protesters, or if they don't agree with the pro-Palestinian protesters, they don't want to live in a country where people are placed in concentration camps over a political disagreement. I'm a little shaky on my history. You'll have to forgive me. But for some reason, and I don't know what happened, but for some reason, 90% of American Jews are extremely uncomfortable with a government rounding up people based on their political beliefs, especially when those beliefs are tied to their religion, nationality, or culture. I don't know what happened. Something must have happened, but 90% of American Jews don't approve of pro-Palestinian protesters being deported or sent to concentration camps. I'm going to have to read up on this. I don't know why the Jews are uncomfortable with this. Palestinians are Semites. By its very definition, placing pro-Palestinian activists in detention centers, it's anti-Semitic. It's anti-Semitic. Okay, I went on a slight tangent because I think I've lost everybody and I need to vent, so suck on it. Just to be clear, Kilmore Abrego Garcia, you're looking at this beautiful child of El Salvador, came here when he was 16 in 2011. He is the El Salvadoran with protected legal status who Trump shipped to that prison in El Salvador. He was deported because Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. I just want to make sure we understand this. That's the emergency power granted to a president during wartime so he can suspend habeas corpus and round up anyone he wants without any due process. The McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, is being used to round up immigrants with pro-Palestinian sympathies. Here's an easy way to remember this, okay? Trump is accusing Hispanic men of being gang members, and in order to detain and deport them, he's using the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to detain and deport Hispanics. Trump is accusing Muslims, not Hispanics, of being Hamas sympathizers. So he's using the McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, to detain and deport Muslims. Let's get the racist nomenclature correct here, okay? Hispanics are the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Trump is saying we're at war with gang members. Muslims are the McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. And that's for Muslims because he doesn't approve of what they're thinking. It's the thought police. He's deporting them because they're a threat to his policy, not national security. It's pure, unadulterated racism. What he's doing to the Muslims, what he's doing to the Hispanics from Venezuela and El Salvador, it's racism, it's scapegoating, it's sadism, it's satisfying bloodlust, it's sexual inadequacy, but most importantly, it's normalizing the dehumanization of innocent people. So authoritarians in the Trump administration can turn America into a police state. That's what this is ultimately about. These people do not believe in democracy. They believe there are two types of people. They do not believe in democracy. They believe there are those who serve others and those who are served. And they want this to be a police state. And by police state, here in America, I mean white people start feeling threatened. That's what I mean by a police state. Because this has always been a police state. Not being glib, not trying to be cute. America has always been a police state for people who weren't white. Hitler studied the Jim Crow South. The Nuremberg laws, written up, they studied the Jim Crow South. South Africa in the late 40s, before instituting apartheid, studied the Jim Crow South. What's going on right now? White people are starting to feel the pinch. White people are saying, we're becoming a police state. Well, this is why you should have paid attention to the Black Lives Matter protests 5 years ago. I partly blame this guy, Dick Wolf, who created the Law and Order franchise. These police procedurals are like The Apprentice, starring Donald Trump. The Apprentice propagated the lie that Donald Trump was a successful businessman. He wasn't. At the time, he was flat broke. He agreed to do that stupid show because he needed the money. There's a great book written by two New York Times reporters. I can't remember what it's called. Something Lucky. On the next show, I'll let you know. It's a great book. And it's about The Apprentice and how when NBC and the producers, Burnett of The Apprentice, they went up to Trump Tower to visit Trump. And they literally gagged from the stench. I'm not making this up. They gagged from the stench of the mold and the dust in Trump's office. They had to come in eventually when he agreed to do it. They came into Trump Tower and built sets to make Trump's office look like it wasn't a broken down bodega in the South Bronx. That's what it looked and smelled like. And Dick Wolf, with these police procedurals, like The Apprentice, brainwashing Americans into thinking that Donald Trump is a successful businessman, these police procedurals brainwash Americans. They convince Americans the police are complicated. Yeah, well, so are criminals. And I have nothing against the police, but I also have nothing against criminals. They should be rehabilitated, and so should many police officers. Here's what our founding fathers wanted for us. They didn't want us rooting for the criminals, and they certainly didn't want us rooting for the cops. They wanted us rooting for the Bill of Rights. If you read the Bill of Rights, all 10 of them, I think 8 are basically how the police should treat citizens. It's how the governed should be governed. Specifically the police, how the police, what they can and can't get away with. Are cops heroes? Absolutely, some of them. But some of them are also members of their own criminal gangs. And the police, like criminals, should never be trusted. The only thing you should trust is our Constitution. It's why government officials swear an oath to obey the Constitution. The Constitution. So the Law and Order franchise trains Americans to become accomplices in the loss of their own civil liberties. I know, it's just a television show. So was The Apprentice. No apprentice, no orange-stained turd sitting in the Oval Office right now. I'd like to see a police procedural where the mayor is telling the DA, I need people locked up. I don't care if they're innocent or guilty. What about a police procedural based on the police in Ferguson who use black people as a source of income, just randomly arresting black people and putting them in a permanent state of debt with fix-it fines and bench warrants. How come we never see those police procedurals? So it's not against the law to root for Hamas. And it's not against the law to belong to a gang. You must take part in criminal activity. You must be charged with a crime. None of these Hispanic men shipped to El Salvador have been charged with a crime. As for the detention of pro-Palestinian protesters, unfortunately, that's another can of worms. They can be detained and deported right now. They don't have to be criminals because, according to the McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, the president can, in fact, deport any immigrant whose politics they disagree with. That's why this country lost Charlie Chaplin. He had to go to Switzerland. Jill Lepore, writing in the New York Times over the weekend, said Elon Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, I can't read my writing. Elon Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, was barred from entering America from Canada during World War II. This was before the McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. Banning immigrants based on their politics, deporting immigrants based on their politics, didn't start during the Cold War, during the 50s. Musk's grandfather was kept out of America because of his anti-Semitic, racist, and fascistic politics. He was deemed a national security threat during World War II because he was a fascist. His politics, his body, banned in America, and Canada, where he lived, they weren't too thrilled about him either. So, after World War II, Elon Musk's grandfather read about this country called South Africa implementing this new thing called apartheid, and he said, "Me likey." So he gathered up the family, and they all moved to South Africa for the apartheid. For the apartheid. So before the McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration and Nationality Act in 1952, presidents had been throwing immigrants out, keeping immigrants from coming in, just because of how they thought. Emma Goldman was sent back to Russia on what they called the Red Ark after World War I. After World War I, they were shipping commies back to Russia. I think it was part of the Palmer raids. Woodrow Wilson, Democrat. Okay, I'm running late. I know. Well, anyway. I want to mention Georgetown University professor Badar Khan-Suri. He was born in India. He's here on a student visa, arrested by masked ICE agents and shipped to a Texas ICE detention facility. First he was sent to Louisiana, then he was sent to a Texas ICE detention facility. Both of those detention facilities fall under the jurisdiction of the Fifth Circuit Court, the most conservative in the country. Georgetown, he should have been held in a detention center in Virginia. That's where he was arrested. They sent him to the Fifth Circuit Court. He's accused of associating with members of Hamas. I think the story is his wife is Palestinian and American, and one of her relatives is one of the negotiators for Hamas? And what? It's garbage. This is not what the Jews want. You're not fighting anti-Semitism. You're creating anti-Semitism. And Palestinians are Semites. This is Nobel laureate Oscar Arias. He used to be the president of Costa Rica in the late 1980s, and then he became president of Costa Rica in 2006 and 2010. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for helping to bring an end to the fighting that had been plaguing Central America during the 80s. Because of Us, another show, and he's a pacifist. Reuters reporting that late last month he was told, "You are forbidden from entering the United States of America." The notice came just hours after he had taken to social media accusing Donald Trump of behaving like a Roman emperor. You'd think Trump would have seen that as high praise. Maybe that's why he can't come into the United States. Or maybe it's because Oscar Arias has a Nobel Peace Prize and Donald Trump doesn't. Trump wants a Nobel Peace Prize, right? He calls him, it's when he's negotiating for peace in Ukraine, "I'm a pacifist." I'll talk about Ukraine on the next show, how Putin is just playing him. But Trump always complains, "Where's my peace prize? Obama got one. Why can't I get one?" He literally says that, literally. So Nobel laureates banned, professors banned. But you know who's not banned from this country? Russell Brand, the brilliant comedian, actor, public intellectual, Russell Brand. He moved to Florida. He lives in Florida right now. Florida, that's the same place the Tate brothers returned to earlier this year, right before having to return to Romania to face rape and kidnapping charges. But the Trump administration facilitated their vacation in Florida. They're trying to get the Tate brothers released from Romania. It'll be interesting to see if Donald Trump fights Russell Brand's extradition to London, where Russell, the public intellectual, is scheduled to appear before a magistrate on May 2nd to stand trial for rape. Unlike any of the other immigrants shipped off to El Salvador, Russell Brand has been accused of a crime, charged with a crime. The people we sent to that prison in El Salvador have not been charged with a crime. Russell Brand, charged with a crime. He's still here in America. He's accused of raping 4 different women. Brand insisting these rape allegations and being charged with rape is the weaponization of our courts punishing him for his newfound conservative beliefs. That's what he claims. When Trump is indicted 4 times, it's the weaponization of the courts, unlike what Trump is doing to Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He's the innocent El Salvadoran, accidentally rounded up and shipped off to an El Salvadoran torture chamber due to what ICE called a mistake. That is him with his child. I usually don't, you're not supposed to show children, but I'm making an exception. That's him with his baby. I don't like, you shouldn't show children, but you also shouldn't lock their fathers up in an El Salvadoran prison based on a mistake. That's what ICE says. It's a mistake, an oversight. Well, bring him home. ICE is saying can't do it. Trump is saying can't do it. Lawyers for the Trump administration told the judge that, yes, ICE made a mistake, but there's nothing we can do about it because he's an El Salvadoran citizen in El Salvador inside an El Salvadoran prison. There's nothing we can do. Nothing we can do. We made a mistake, but there's nothing we can do. Really? You can't call the president of El Salvador and say, we're paying you $6 million a year to house these men. Either you release Kilmar Abrego Garcia or blobbity, blobbity, blah. It just ends with somebody screaming, I drink your milkshake. We're the United States of America. I drink your milkshake. Send him home. But Trump wants to keep him there. He wants to mess with our courts. Lawyers for Trump right now are messing with our courts. They told the judge that the issue isn't releasing a wrongfully imprisoned man. The issue is whether a judge can dictate foreign policy to the president of the United States. That is what Trump's lawyers argued before Judge Paula Exinis, or what I can't pronounce her last name. They said the issue isn't that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is innocent and now is in a prison. The issue is judges should not be dictating foreign policy to the president of the United States. So this is foreign policy. Rounding up and imprisoning the wrong people is Trump's foreign policy. That's what they're saying. And it is. That is their foreign policy. On Friday, U.S. District Judge Paula Exinis told one of the lawyers from the Justice Department, this is what she said, quote, this was an illegal act. You knew you couldn't do it, but you did it anyway. Vice President J.D. Vance and White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt continue to lie about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. They keep saying he's a criminal. They keep saying he's a member of MS-13. It's not true. ICE has said he's not MS-13. The judge in 2009 granted him protected legal status because he's not a gang member. ICE said we made a mistake. There's nothing we can do about it, but we made a mistake. And Caroline Leavitt and J.D. Vance continue to repeat the lie that he's a gang member and a criminal. Do you know how evil this is? This is the definition of evil. Pure evil. Judge Paula Exinis said of the accusations that he is a criminal or a member of MS-13, this is what she told Trump's lawyer, who brought up the charge that Garcia is MS-13. She said, quote, that's just chatter. I haven't been given any evidence because there is none. She went on to say, in a court of law, when someone is accused of membership in such a violent and predatory organization, it comes in the form of an indictment, a complaint, a criminal proceeding that has robust process so we can assess the facts, unquote. According to the New Republic, the Justice Department lawyer, Erez Ravini, then admitted to the judge he's seen no evidence either that Garcia is a criminal or a gang member. Trump's own lawyer, Erez Ravini, says to the judge, quote, I'm also frustrated that I have no answer for you on a lot of these questions. His name is Erez Ruveni. He's an assistant director in the Justice Department's Office of Immigration Litigation. According to the New Republic, he told the judge, quote, "The government made a choice here to produce no evidence for me to back up these claims." The lawyer for the Trump administration says, yeah, the government, Trump, wants me to claim that Garcia is a criminal and a member of MS-13, but they made a choice to produce no evidence. The New Republic reporting that Ruveni, he's Erez Ruveni, he's the assistant director in the Justice Department's Office of Immigration Litigation. The New Republic reports that he told the judge that he said, "I asked the Trump administration, why is Kilmar Abrego Garcia still stuck in America? I asked them, why can't he be returned to America?" He went on to say, "When this case landed on my desk, I asked my clients," that would be Trump, Kristi Noem, the head of DHS, ICE, "I asked my clients that very question, Your Honor. I have not received to date an answer that I find satisfactory." How is this not the biggest story in America? Where Trump's own lawyer from the Justice Department is saying, yeah, they're not cooperating with me either. ABC News reporting that Yaakov M. Roth, he's the acting assistant attorney general for the Civil Division for the Department of Justice. I don't have a picture of him, but this will do. I'm pretty sure this is what he looks like. Yaakov M. Roth, acting assistant attorney general for the Civil Division for the Justice Department. According to ABC News, he assured Judge Paul Agini that there's no evidence, quote, that Kilmar Abrego Garcia himself is likely to be tortured or killed in the El Salvadoran prison. He said, quote, "While there may be allegations of abuses in other El Salvadoran prisons, very few, however, in relation to the large number of detainees." He's defending the El Salvadoran prisons. He's saying when you consider that about 90,000 El Salvadorans are behind bars, there are very few incidents of torture and death. Tell that to Amnesty International. He goes on to say, quote, "There's no clear evidence showing that Kilmar Abrego Garcia himself is likely to be tortured or killed. In other words, trust us. Trust us." ABC says Roth went on to say, quote, "More fundamentally, this court should defer to the government's determination that Kilmar Abrego Garcia will not likely be tortured or killed in El Salvador." So that's his argument. Nobody's saying he belongs in that prison. One Trump lawyer says the issue isn't that Garcia is innocent and he shouldn't be in the prison. We know he shouldn't be in the prison. The bigger issue is, should a judge be dictating foreign policy? And this guy, Roth, is saying the issue isn't whether or not Garcia should be in that prison. The issue is, are you going to trust us when we say he's not going to be tortured or killed in that prison? They find it offensive that the judge doesn't believe the Justice Department when they say, you don't have to worry, he's the innocent man we accidentally sent to that torture chamber in El Salvador, he's not going to be killed or tortured. And we find it offensive that you don't trust us when we tell you that. Because when has this Justice Department lied to the judges in the past 2 months? They lie every step of the way when it comes to these deportations. They lied and said Garcia was a member of MS-13. They lied and said he had a criminal record. They lied and said the planes had already landed, that it was too late to turn them around. That was a lie. They've told one lie after another to all the judges. They even went so far as to say the prisons of El Salvador, which we know are now the most dangerous in our hemisphere, Trump lawyers, perfectly safe. Liars. Liars, liars, liars. ABC reporting that Robert Cerna, one of the top officials at the U.S. Immigration Customs and Enforcement Field Office, he's one of the top ICE officials in Texas, he said in a sworn declaration that was delivered to this judge that the removal of Kilmer Abrego Garcia was, quote unquote, carried out in good faith. It was an oversight, but the removal was carried out in good faith. Good faith. None of this involves good faith. All these people, from J.D. Vance to Donald Trump to Caroline Leavitt, who called herself a Christian warrior last week, to Mike Johnson, to this entire Justice Department, Pam Bondi with those enormous crosses on her cleavage. None of this involves good faith. They have no faith. They have no faith in people. They don't have any faith in Jesus. That's why they rewrite his sermons. They don't believe in any other higher power than money, guns, and cruelty. They better hope there is no hell. But something tells me they're already in hell. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for listening to me. It's good to get back and do live shows. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. That's the best way. Please subscribe to this channel. Please subscribe to my newsletter. Leave it. I read all your comments. If I got anything wrong, I invite you to correct me. I invite you to Google everything I say and correct me. And if you're correct in correcting me, I'll respond. I'll respond in the comments section, or I'll bring it up on the show. So I invite your corrections. Leave comments. They help the show. Thank you to everybody in the chat room. Thanks to Bob and Mila in the chat room. Where is that picture? Hang on. There we go. Okay. Thanks to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping it civil. All right. I hope you got out and protested on Saturday. Do not get arrested. You do not want to get arrested. Do not put yourself in a situation where the police have power over your body. If you're black, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not black, ask your black friend to tell you what they tell their children. Before you go and protest, call your black friend and say, hey, what do you tell your kids when they leave the house? What's the talk? If they're kind enough, they will share the talk. Do not get arrested. All right. Thank you, everybody. Stay angry. Stay active. Lash out peacefully. Lash out with your voice and your pen. But get to work, lash out peacefully, and do not get arrested. And if you think that's chicken shit, because a lot of times I say don't get arrested, and some of my white listeners write, that's chicken shit. Ask your black friend about the talk. Do not get arrested. Do not put yourself in a situation where you can get arrested.